Preachers and teachers, Maidenslave here, and today I'm going to be talking about some Morbid Angel. Finally! They're just, they're a big deal. They were a huge part of the whole Florida death metal scene back in the late 80s, early 90s. You know, just like a lot of those other bands that were huge, Morbid had their own unique thing going on for them. You know, they weren't like as aggressive and brutal as you know, like a Cannibal Corpse or an Immolation, but they also didn't have the same vibe as a Death. I mean, they had their own thing going on, and they definitely proved that you didn't have to be black metal to sing about anti-religious stuff. And obviously Deicide would pretty much take that and then kind of Cannibal Corpse it, you know, kind of go over the top with that whole thing. But, you know, Morbid Angel is a bit of a, you know, more highbrow type of death metal band, which isn't that familiar, especially back in these days. Isn't that common, is what I should have probably said. They took their music a little bit more seriously, and I'm not saying that all the other bands didn't take it more seriously, but a lot of the other death metal bands were a lot more kind of street. They had a lot more of we don't care what we look like, we don't care about putting, you know, bells and whistles on our, you know, music. We just want to play what we play, and, you know, kind of just do what we do, and that's what we're going to offer. Very, very much in the vein of what thrash metal did and what the new wave of British heavy metal did before that. But, you know, Morbid were a little bit more intellectual as far as, you know, adding keyboards, adding, you know, little orchestral parts in their music. But to be quite honest, I mean, once you get into any of the albums, into the early albums, they are just complete death metal. You cannot deny the vocals, the riffs, the drumming by Pete Sandoval, who is, of course, one of the most influential death metal drummers of all time. And of course, their debut album, Altars of Sadness, is in the discussion of what was the first death metal album. Personally, I don't think that there was a first. I think that there was just different albums that kind of led up to what would definitely be death metal. And Altars of Kindness absolutely was one of those albums. You know, the year before it, Leprosy came out, which was, in my opinion, the most monumental death metal album to come out in the early days. But Altars was, you know, almost just as important in many ways. And then, of course, Eaten Back to Life would come out 1 year after that. So it was just like, it was constantly getting crazier and crazier as far as the genre goes, as far as them kind of detaching themselves from thrash metal, which is what pretty much every form of extreme metal was called back in the day. And in my opinion, the Black Album completely changed all of that. But that's a different discussion for a different day. Right now we're talking about Altars, the actual album, which is fantastic. It's very much a riff band going on here. And of course, Pete Sandoval's unique style of drumming adds a lot to the sound of this band. I'm not the biggest fan of anti-religious lyrics, and it's not because I am religious, because I'm not. I just don't care for it that much. I'm a bigger fan of real life stuff. And of course, you can't really talk about Morbid Angel without talking about Trey Axanathoth, because his guitar playing, his riffs, to me, are the Morbid Angel sound. That, in my opinion, is when Morbid is at their best. When you hear some badass riffs played by Trey, with, of course, Pete Sandoval on the back, going nuts, playing extremely fast drums. That's pretty much when I'm the happiest. And throughout the album, there's pretty much no moment in which I get bored. I enjoy listening to the whole thing. This album starts off great, and it just kind of keeps going from there. It keeps going up and going up and going up, and like every like a few seconds, whenever it even feels like it's starting to get a little bit boring. It goes into a different riff, has a different vocal part, has some badass solos, and it really does a good job of keeping my attention. So yeah, Altars of Madness is a great album. It really is. It's a very important album, and I don't see how anybody who is a fan of death metal could not enjoy it a little bit. And I can definitely understand a lot of people who keep hearing about Morbid, and then they finally listen to Morbid, and they actually find out that it's not that great, how they could be a little bit more critical of Morbid. And in many ways, I was kind of like that too, because when you first listen to them, they aren't the best band from that era, because with a band like Death, you can listen to one song, because there's very, very, very strong individual songs from that band, and be like, okay, yeah, they're awesome. And even with Cannibal, you can listen to one song and just be like, that's so brutal, I want more. And other bands as well, Deicide, Obituary, there's plenty of bands that have very strong songs. But Morbid is definitely the kind of band that needs some time. You need to listen to the entire album a few times. You need to listen to the next album, Blessed Are the Sick, and Covenant. And over a period of time, I think that's when you start to really get a good feel for how good Morbid is. So yeah, I do agree that it can be misleading when everybody's talking about how good Morbid is, because when you first start listening to them, they might not sound, pretty much any more special than a lot of other death metal bands, especially when people are going around saying how technical they are. I think that's a huge mistake. They're a great band. They're an important band from the past, and they definitely should be listened to for anybody who's a fan of death metal. And I think that this album right here, Altars of Madness, out of all their albums, is the most important album that you should have already listened to if you're a fan of death metal. If you're just getting into death metal, this is probably a great place to start, because the vocals aren't too harsh, and if anything, the music is actually a lot more similar to thrash, especially during the time in which it came out. So overall, Altars of Madness is a great album. Not the greatest death metal album of all time, but it certainly is awesome, especially considering the fact that it came out in 1989, when death metal was just getting started. So I'm going to give Altars of Madness by Morbid Angel an 8 out of 10, and I'll see you guys later.